I'm a very sad example of a libertarian because I mean, I was well into my 50s before the light dawned here. What was I before that? Well, it's hard to know. I wasn't politically actively anything much. My social inclinations are conservative and still are. Um, and so therefore, if I had to be anything politically, I suppose I would have been a political conservative as well.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, I was active in Irish politics in the 90s, in electoral politics and so on. Very unsuccessfully, may I say, spectacularly so. But that's, which is good, which is great, because it would have been the worst thing ever to have happened to me if I'd been successful. As, the old saying goes, be careful what you wish for, you might get it. And so, yeah. And so what happened was I've always been kind of fascinated by money. And not only by the fact that I never seem to have enough, but it's very strange that people are willing to give you goods and services for grubby bits of paper.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and try this experiment sometime, but not in reality, because you're going to get arrested, okay, by the IRS or the FBI or somebody. Do up your own fancy, Liam banknote, okay, from the Bank of Liam, and tell them, it's 20 Liams, and you try to see if anybody, make it look good. Okay, make it look like a greenback, right? And no, you better not do that either, because that's illegal. I forgot, you can't do that, right? Okay, but let's do a thought experiment. Okay, this is not practical. And take it along to your local store and say, when the guy says, when you're paying for your pizza, you say, which would you rather have? Would you rather have 5 of this old fuddy-duddy US, Federal Reserve stuff, or could you have 20 of the new Liams? And if he doesn't put a gun in you, I mean, you're probably lucky. Okay, why is it that somebody's willing to take this bit of paper and not that bit of paper? Because, I mean, apart from the graphics and the design and anything else, when it comes right down to it, they're both bits of paper. Okay, right? So it is kind of mysterious when you think about it. And of course, one of the things that's happened as a result of COVID is that we're now going to see the assault on cash, is ramping up, and the government would love us to move everything electronically, because then you'd have no access to your money except through an institution. It'll all be done electronically. You couldn't just squirt it away under a mattress. So it's very strange that it should be so. So I was always puzzled by money. Anyway, to come to the point here, a friend of mine in the Department of Philosophy in University College Dublin was going off on sabbatical to Germany. He was interested in German philosophy, and when he came back, we'd conversed about this. So when he came back, he brought me back a book called The Theory of Money and Credit by somebody called Ludwig von Mises. I had no idea who Ludwig von Mises was. And I don't know if you've ever looked at The Theory of Money and Credit. I mean, this is without wishing to be sort of racist in any way, this is a German book. I mean, this is a serious book, okay? This is not frivolous. Okay, my former professor said to me one time, he said, Mr. Casey, when you're reading books in foreign languages, remember, he said, that when you read a book in German, you should read only the footnotes. Okay. And he said, when you're reading a book in French, you should never read the footnotes. They're only there for decoration. Okay. But in any way, this is a Teutonic work. I mean, this is a serious, 500-page tough work. But the point is that, as I think many of your listeners will have had, there are times in your life when a subject comes up, which, even if it's difficult, you will grasp and put the effort into trying to understand, because it answers a question that's actually really live for you. Okay, and so my question about what money was and how it came into being and how it worked and what it did, those were live questions for me. So when I read this book, it was like it hit me with a kind of blinding revelation, because it explained how money, not only speculatively how money had come into being, but when you thought about it, how money must have come into being. which was really exciting to me. And then, of course, I started reading the other works by Mises, okay, Bureaucracy and so on, Human Action, of course. And then once you start down that path, as most people who are listening, if they know anything about where I'm coming from, will realize you're going down the rabbit hole, because very soon you're into the Mises Institute, and then it's all Rothbard, and then there's about 100 million books to read, and there's all sorts of stuff. Anyway, so I devoured all of this because I was in the rand. So within about 2 years, I became almost instantly sort of a libertarian, because I realized what was going on here. But it took me about 2 years reading voluminously. See, when I'm really interested, you read really fast, you devour stuff really quickly, at least I do anyway. And so that was in the early noughties of this millennium. And then I had obviously come to know the Mises Institute, and I thought, oh, I think I'll go visit. So I went to what was then the Austrian Scholars Conference in 2007, and I gave a paper, and nobody knew who I was. It was like, who is that masked man? Well, we weren't wearing masks then, but so that was kind of fun. And that's it, really. But the key point to take away from, apart from the explanation of money, was that the whole approach of Austrian economics did something which I thought was impossible to do. Because anybody who's into philosophy and familiar with the notion of the synthetic a priori, which comes from Kant, the idea is that there can be, in other words, something which is synthetic is meant to be informative and therefore a matter of experience and so on. Something which is analytic is true by virtue of the meaning of the words. And therefore it seems impossible that you could have something which is both synthetic, if you like, informative, and at the same time and a priori, in other words, known somehow in advance. And Kant argued for this, of course, in his Critique of Pure Reason. But most people would normally think of the synthetic a priori as applying only to the realm of logic and mathematics. But the really interesting thing about Austrian economics is that it puts a form of the synthetic a priori at the heart of economics. I mean, let me explain what I mean by that. Many people, including myself, would have thought that in an exchange, one person gains and another person loses. And to use the language of game theory, that exchange is zero sum, right? If I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. A bit as if we were playing poker or something. Obviously, if there are two of us left in the game, there's a pot on the table. Okay, one of us is going to win, one of us is going to lose. Right? That's how it works. Okay, so people I think, including myself, thought that all sorts of exchange, economic exchange, particularly, of course, the whole capitalist system was built, if you like, on this idea of zero sumness, which meant that some people were gaining at the expense of others. So where does the synthetic a priori come in here? And it comes in this point. In an uncoerced exchange between any two human beings, okay, now prescinding from everything else, so let's leave everything else to one side. If you and I agree to an exchange, okay, I have, for example, let's say I have this really, really nice pen, okay, and you've got a really nice hat, and I've got lots of pens, but I don't have a hat, and you've got lots of hats, but you don't have a pen. So we get talking, and I say, oh, William, how about this? We do a little swap. I give you my pen for your hat, and you go, oh, okay, great, and we swap. In an uncoerced exchange, both people gain. Not only is it the case that an uncoerced exchange is not zero sum, it's actually positive sum. And this being positive sum is not only a contingent matter of experience that we have to investigate to find out, it has to be the case. Otherwise, the exchange wouldn't take place. Now that, you see, remember, coming from philosophy where the synthetic a priori is really linked to mathematics and logic, right, which are abstract entities. And here is the synthetic a priori working in what is a very practical area. Now, the point is, you may not know, you may change your mind. Okay, people do. So, have you ever bought anything on impulse? Yeah. And when somebody says, why did you buy that? And you go, kind of foolishly, you say, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And that's exactly right. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Even if your buyer's regret is more or less instantaneous, nonetheless, at the point of the exchange, okay, you exchanged your hat for my pen because you thought you were making on the deal. Not a whole lot, you're not going to get rich, you're not going to be able to retire, okay? And I thought I was getting something that I needed more than my pen. And that's how it works. And that was a real shock. It's hard. I mean, that may not seem like people go, wow, you're easily impressed or you're easily shocked. But that was like for somebody coming from the world of philosophy, that was like a slap in the face with a wet fish. I mean, I was just, went, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's called subjective value theory, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And is there any, like, I guess, valid criticism against it that you've heard? Like, will someone say that, for instance, someone's environment caused them to buy an item and they actually lost in that transaction? Like, has there been any argument that you've actually felt challenged by?
No, because it's, as I said, because it's synthetic a priori, once you grasp its truth, you see not only is it in fact true, but it has to be true. And of course, somebody can say, well, hang on a second. I mean, to come back to the point of buyer's regret, let's take a classic example. Let's take a certain island off the northeast coast of the United States. And let's go back to the 17th century. And I happen to be a person of Dutch ancestry. And I would like this island. And I've got a superfluity of beads and trinkets. And you were a Native American who owns the island, or whose tribe owns the island. And you've got hundreds of these islands. Okay. I mean, there's nothing special about this one, right? So what you don't have, however, are some nice beads. So we trade. I give you some nice beads and some trinkets, and you give me the island, and we're both happy. Now, looking at this 400 years later, you might say, well, hang on a second, that's Manhattan, right? Okay. I mean, that's worth how much? Well, the trouble is, of course, it wasn't worth anything like that at the time. And the subjective valuation of the owner, okay, vis-a-vis the beads and trinkets, was that the beads and trinkets were worth more, right? And again, from the point of view of the person of Dutch ancestry, the opposite was the case. So yeah, circumstances change, okay? And I mean, what Austrian economics is doing is not saying that you can sit in your armchair and do all your economics by just kind of gazing into the sky and kind of thinking deeply. But it says that some things are not up for grabs. So that when you see, for example, changes, okay, let's take the law of supply and demand. Okay, which is not particularly Austrian if it comes to that. I mean, even standard economics has it. But so one thing would say that if other things being equal, and notice that's very important, other things being equal, if you have a supply of a good, okay, and a price, and they're stable, and then the supply were to increase, then other things being equal, the price of the good will go down. Right? Now, suppose in a real life situation, you actually check on the supply of a good and you see that its supply has doubled. But in fact, the price hasn't gone down. Oh, does that invalidate the law? And the answer is no. What it tells you is that there are other factors in the environment, perhaps government regulations, who knows what it is, it could be anything, right? Which is interfering, if you like, with how that law. So what the law does, if it isn't, if you like, exemplified in the pure form in the actual outcome, it tells you that there are other factors, interfering factors, as it were, in the environment, which are affecting what actually goes on. And so the subjective theory of value works in the same way. You could go to some place where, I don't know, where Europeans have never been before, and you might witness an exchange, or what looks like an exchange between two people. And as you look at it, let's say a person is exchanging, let's just call it A for B, right? And you go, wow, I really love to have A. I mean, that's incredibly valuable, right? And he gives this away for something that you think is absolutely worthless. Well, without being rude, who cares what you think? Okay, you're not the one making the exchange, right? These people have their own valuations of A and B respectively, and are making judgments about the reciprocal values and are exchanging on that basis. Now, once they come in, of course, into the larger economic system, it may well be, and probably will be the case, that their evaluations of these entities will change and change radically. Mm-hmm. But that's a matter of empirical fact. What won't change is a subjective theory of value.